sunset in Decatur had always been special. Even as the city sprawled with high-rises and shopping malls, the evening sun managed to break through the concrete jungle and paint the sky with colors that no amount of money could buy. I stood on the terrace of my house holding a cup of cooled tea and watched as the last rays colored the clouds. My name is Agatha Flannery, 78 years old, widow, former chief accountant for Decatur Construction, the company that turned a sleepy little town into a thriving metropolis. For 35 years, I followed the financial flows that changed the face of the town. Every new building began with numbers in my books. My house stood on a hill overlooking the city, two-story, spacious, with a large garden. It had been my fortress and refuge all these years. Many people wondered why a single woman would need such a big house. They did not understand that it was not about square meters, but about the feeling of freedom. After my husband Harold died, I didn't want to change anything. 30 years of life together are not simply erased. Contrary to the expectations of others, I did not turn into a typical grieving widow. The grief was deep, but I never let it consume me completely. I'd seen too many women whose lives ended along with those of their husbands. I'd always been too stubborn for that. In the kitchen cupboard, a tin box of cookies was stored behind the cereal and tea tins. Inside were the documents that defined my life. My birth certificate, my diploma, my marriage license, Harold's will, my financial records. The paper is faded, but the numbers remain the same. Thousands of dollars turned into millions through careful investments and savings. Financial literacy was not innate to me. I grew up in a family where paychecks were often a week and a half away. My father worked in a factory, my mother was a seamstress. Every penny counted. The only luxury they allowed themselves was my education, accounting courses, which opened the way to the world of finance. I started as a simple bookkeeper in a small construction firm. I worked overtime, studied tax laws at night, saved money on everything, saving 20% of every paycheck. When the firm was taken over by Decatur Construction, I was noticed by the holding company's founder, Frank Porter. "You have a grasping mind and nerves of steel," he said at the time. "Exactly what you need to work with big money." 10 years later, I became the holding company's chief accountant. 15 years later, I became a member of the board of directors. By that time, my personal savings made it possible not to worry about the future. But I continued to work, not for the money, but for the feeling of control and importance. I was feared and respected in the office. No one dared present a financial report with a calculation error. Hawkeye Flannery, that's what they called me behind my back. At home, things were different. Harold, a civil engineer, was sympathetic to my work, but my daughter Vivian took it as a personal insult. "You love your numbers more than you love me," she threw in my face as a teenager. There may have been some truth to that. Vivian was born when I was 41, a late, unexpected child. I hadn't planned on becoming a mother at that age. My career was in full swing. But Harold wanted a child so badly, I couldn't say no. Maternity leave lasted only 2 months, which was as long as I could stand to be away from work. I hired a nanny, made a schedule of feedings, swaddling and walks with the same meticulousness with which I made financial reports. Vivian grew up a wayward child. In kindergarten, she bit other children. At school, she sassed teachers. "She's just a bright personality," Harold said. "She's out of control," I countered. We often argued about parenting methods. He believed the child needed more freedom. I insisted on discipline. As a result, Vivian received contradictory signals: strictness from her mother and permissiveness from her father. My daughter's transition coincided with my promotion to board member. 60-hour work weeks, constant meetings, business trips. I was home mostly to sleep. Harold took over most of my daughter's care, but his gentleness resulted in Vivian becoming a spoiled, selfish girl with high expectations by the time she was 16. Our most serious conflict occurred when she was 16. She wanted to go to a party with a high school boy about whom there were nasty rumors. I told her not to. She left through the window. When I discovered her absence, I called everyone I knew, found out the address, and drove to the party. Found my daughter surrounded by drunk teenagers, grabbed her by the arm and took her home. 2 weeks of house arrest. A month without pocket money, cell phone taken away. Vivian didn't speak to me until after graduation. She communicated through notes or her father. On graduation day, I gave her a gold watch, the same one Frank Porter had once given me in recognition of my accomplishments. She accepted the gift with cold politeness and left a week later for college on the other side of the country. For the next 4 years, we saw each other only at Christmas and Thanksgiving. We talked about the weather, school, the latest movies, everything but our relationship. When she graduated from college and moved back to Decatur, I hoped we could start over. I offered her a job in the finance department of a holding company. She turned it down and took a job in real estate. Harold died when Vivian was 25, a heart attack, quick and unexpected. At the funeral, she kept a detached demeanor, as if it were the funeral of a stranger, not her father. After the wake, she flew back to her life, leaving me to deal with my inheritance and grief alone. I plunged even deeper into work, if that was even possible. I was the first one in the office, the last one out. I took on projects that younger colleagues refused to take on. At 58, she suffered a microstroke during a board meeting. The doctors insisted on reducing my workload. I reduced my work week to 40 hours and considered it a vacation. At 65, I retired, not by choice, but because it was company policy. I received a gold watch, different now, even more expensive, a eulogy from the new CEO, and a check for what most people would consider a fantastic sum. To me, it didn't seem like enough compensation for 40 years of life given to the company. The first year of retirement was the hardest. I didn't know what to do. I tried traveling, but quickly tired of airports and hotels. I enrolled in Italian cooking classes, but quit after the third class. Too many people, too little structure. Eventually found solace in what I'd always done best, financial management. Only now it was exclusively my finances. I created a system of investments, diversified my portfolio, followed the stock market reports with the same attention that I had once followed the financial reports of the holding company. My savings grew to a sum I could hardly spend in the rest of my life. But money had never been an end in itself, only a means of security and independence. My relationship with Vivian had not improved over the years. She married Noel Treadwell, a middle manager at an insurance company. She invited me to the wedding a week before the ceremony and sat me at the table with the groom's distant relatives. I didn't take offense. I was used to that attitude. Noel turned out to be a weak-willed man with big ambitions and little ability. A typical office worker, dreaming of a promotion but not willing to put in enough effort. Vivian quickly took the upper hand in their relationship. He became what was known in my youth as a jack of all trades. 3 years after the wedding, Marlo was born. I found out I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter by accidentally meeting her at the supermarket. There was no hiding the belly anymore. "I was going to tell you," she lied. We both knew it wasn't true. When Marlo was 3 months old, Vivian brought her to me for the first time. It was an awkward visit. I didn't know how to handle an infant. Vivian watched my every move critically. The gifts I'd bought, rattles, soft toys, a baby blanket. She barely dignified with a glance. "We already have all that stuff, just better quality," she said, as if I'd suggested dressing her baby in rags. I offered to help financially. "Babies are expensive, especially in the early years," I said, holding out a check. Vivian looked at the amount and grinned. "That's not even enough for a month of diapers, Mom." I knew that wasn't true. The amount was more than generous, but I didn't argue. I just wrote a new check for 3 times that amount. She took it without comment. After that visit, I saw my granddaughter every few months, always under Vivian's watchful eye. Marlo was a carbon copy of her mother as a child, the same bright blue eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same tendency to throw tantrums if things didn't go her way. I tried to connect with my granddaughter, but Vivian always stood between us with an invisible wall. If I tried to hold Marlo in my arms, Vivian would find a reason why I shouldn't. If I offered to read a book to my granddaughter, it was time to leave. Toys I gave her were left unpacked or mysteriously lost. Over time, I came to terms with my role in the lives of my daughter and granddaughter. A distant relative who is tolerated out of a sense of duty. I stopped imposing, waiting for invitations, which became less and less frequent. The last time I saw Marlo was 6 months ago at Christmas. She barely recognized me, shy and huddled with her mother. A phone call snapped me out of my reverie. The name on the screen was Beatrice Coleman, my former colleague and probably the only person I could call a real friend. Agatha, did you remember about the bridge tomorrow? Beatrice's voice was as cheerful as ever. How could I forget? I grinned. I need to make up for last time. The card club was the only social event I attended regularly. 4 women, all in their 70s, all with similar stories. We didn't play so much for the game as for the chance to talk without pretending. You've been distracted lately, Beatrice said. Is everything all right? It's just old age forgetfulness, I joked, not wanting to go into the reasons for my mood. Don't be pompous, she snorted. You remember all my debts to the nearest dime. By the way, did you hear your granddaughter's birthday is coming up? Vivian seems to be planning something big. My heart skipped a beat. No, I hadn't heard. It wasn't a lie. I knew Marlowe's birthday was at the end of July, but I didn't know Vivian was planning a special celebration. I'm sorry, I thought you knew, Beatrice said, embarrassed. My sister-in-law works at the same real estate office as Vivian. She says it's been all she's been talking about all week. I think they rented a whole entertainment center. It's no big deal. I lied. Maybe she was going to call me closer to the date. We both knew it wasn't true, but Beatrice was tactful enough not to broach the subject. After the conversation, I went back into the house. The sunset no longer seemed so beautiful. It was just a red-orange sky, nothing special. There were framed photographs on the mantel in the living room. Harold as a young man, the 2 of us on our wedding day. Vivian in her graduation dress, little Marlo on my last visit 6 months ago. I took this photo and looked closely at my granddaughter's face. She would soon be 5. Bright blue eyes, brown hair, dimples on her cheeks. She was a carbon copy of Vivian at that age. The thought of not being invited to my granddaughter's birthday party was not unexpected. It was just another confirmation of my place in my daughter's life, somewhere on the periphery, among the unimportant details. It hurt, but it wasn't fatal. I'd survived worse blows. I put the picture back on the mantel and went to make dinner. I rarely cooked anything complicated alone, but tonight I decided to make lasagna, a dish Vivian had adored as a child. Sometimes memories are the only things that remain. The morning light filtered through the curtains, creating soft shadows on the walls of my bedroom. I was wide awake, but I wasn't in a hurry to get up. At my age, the morning hours are filled with a special coziness, when the body is still resting and the mind is awake. It is at such times that the clearest thoughts often come, and more often than not, those thoughts were of Marlo, my granddaughter, 5 years old, birthday coming up, a day I will likely spend alone, leafing through old photo albums and imagining her blowing out the candles on a cake I will never see. Marlo's picture stood on my bedside table, the only picture Vivian had deigned to email me for Christmas. Happy holidays from all of us, the short caption read. No details, no personal wishes, no invitation to visit. Just a formality, like a greeting card from an insurance company. I reached for the picture. Marlo was smiling, sitting on a fluffy rug near a decorated Christmas tree. She was wearing a red dress with a white collar, her hair gathered into 2 ponytails. A typical Christmas photo shoot, cozy, staged, impersonal. I scrutinized her features, trying to see myself or Harold. Something of us had to remain in her, despite Vivian's best efforts to etch our influence. My encounters with my granddaughter could be counted on my fingers. The first time I saw her was when she was 3 months old. Vivian arrived unannounced, calling from the driveway, "We'll be there in 20 minutes." I rushed to clean the house even though it was already spotlessly clean. I made fresh tea, pulled out the cookies Vivian had loved as a child. They stayed for 45 minutes. Most of the time, Vivian was on the phone while I tried to make out the facial features of the tiny creature wrapped in an expensive pink blanket. The next time was when Marlo turned 6 months old. It was the first time I held her in my arms, tentatively, afraid of doing something wrong under Vivian's gaze. My granddaughter looked at me curiously, blowing bubbles and trying to grab my earrings. I felt a rush of tenderness I hadn't felt even for my own daughter. Perhaps age makes us softer. When Marlo turned a year old, Vivian threw a big party. She rented a banquet hall, invited dozens of guests, ordered a 3-tiered cake. I got a formal invitation in the mail 2 weeks before the event. I bought a gold bracelet engraved with the date of my birth, a traditional gift in our family. Vivian barely glanced at it and handed the box to Noel, saying, "Put it with the other gifts." I never saw that bracelet on Marlo again. At that birthday party, I was seated at a table with Noel's elderly relatives. His mother, Elizabeth, sat next to Vivian, holding the birthday girl in her arms and accepting compliments as if she were her own granddaughter. No one introduced me as Grandma Marlo. To most of the guests, I was just one of the many relatives. After the party, I offered to help clean up. "No need, Mom," Vivian waved me off. "We hired people." They left without saying goodbye while I talked to one of the mothers of the invited children. When Marlo turned 2, Vivian called the day before the party. "We've decided to celebrate in a small family circle." The family circle, as it turned out, included Noel's parents, his brother, and his wife and children. A few of Vivian's friends, but not me. I sent a gift by courier, a soft toy that I had chosen with great care. A week later, I received a formal thank you card, written in Vivian's hand but signed on Marlo's behalf. Marlo had chickenpox when she was 3. I found out about it by chance from Beatrice, whose daughter-in-law worked with Vivian. I called my daughter, offered to help. "It's okay now," she replied coldly. "Noel's mom has been with us all week." I bit my tongue to keep from asking why she hadn't called me. Knowing Vivian, she would have taken it as a rebuke and distanced herself even more. At 4 years old, Marlo stayed overnight at my house for the first time. Not at Vivian's request, but out of necessity. She and Noel had an important work trip, and the babysitter was sick. I'd been preparing for this visit for 2 weeks. I'd bought princess bedding, filled the refrigerator with food that Vivian said Marlo loved, and bought some educational games. Vivian brought her granddaughter with detailed instructions: what she eats, what time she goes to bed, what cartoons to watch. "And no sweets before bedtime," she sternly warned. "It gives her nightmares." I nodded, memorizing every word, though inside I was seething with resentment. Like I hadn't raised my own child and didn't know the basics. Those 24 hours with Marlo had been some of the happiest I'd had in years. We read books, played board games, and baked cookies. She turned out to be an inquisitive child with a lively mind and a sense of humor unexpected for her age. We easily found a common language when Vivian and her eternal distrust did not stand between us. In the evening, as I put her to bed, I told her a story I'd once made up for Vivian about a little squirrel who was afraid of heights but dreamed of seeing the stars. Marlo listened with bated breath, and then she asked, "Tell me more about your mom when she was little." I told about Vivian learning to ride a bike, how we went to the zoo, how she went to school for the first time. Marlo fell asleep with a smile on her face. When Vivian came to pick up her daughter, she rushed over to me for a goodbye hug and asked loudly, "Mommy, can I come to see Grandma more often?" Vivian's face froze. "We'll see," she gritted through her teeth. "We have a very busy schedule." 8 months had passed since then. Marlo no longer stayed overnight or even for a few hours. The last time I saw my granddaughter was Christmas 6 months ago. Vivian had invited me to dinner, a formal event where Noel's parents and a few of his coworkers were also present. Marlo barely remembered me, was shy, and kept squeezing up against Elizabeth, calling her Grandma. She called me Mrs. Flannery, which was apparently what Vivian had taught her. I brought a gift, a children's encyclopedia about space. "Too complicated for her age," Vivian declared, without even opening the book. "And we already have something similar." Elizabeth was handing Marlo a huge box with a dollhouse in it, which she immediately started unpacking with delighted squeals. My present had been left forgotten under the tree. I got out of bed, pushing the bitter memories away. It was pointless to replay those scenes over and over in my head. It only stung the old wounds without bringing relief. In the bathroom, I scrutinized my reflection. 78 years old. Wrinkles, gray hair, age spots on my arms. But my back was still straight, my gaze clear. I'd never let myself sink, physically or mentally. I exercised every morning, watched my diet, had regular medical checkups, not out of vanity, but for practical reasons. The longer I remained healthy and independent, the longer I could manage my life. After breakfast, I called Vivian. Not that I was expecting an invitation to Marlo's birthday party, but I wanted to at least know the exact date so I could send a gift. "Hi, Mom." Vivian's voice sounded strained, as it always did when talking to me. Is something wrong? Nothing much, I answered as casually as I could. I just wanted to see how you were. I'm fine, thanks. Listen, I'm a little busy right now. Can I call you back later? Typical Vivian. Always too busy to talk to me. But today, I wasn't going to give up so easily. Of course, darling. By the way, I was thinking about Marlo's birthday present. When exactly is it going to be? I want to make sure I get it to her in time. There was a pause. Next Saturday, she said finally. But don't worry about the present. She's already got so much stuff. I'd still like to get her something, I insisted. What would she like? I don't know, Vivian said, impatience in her voice. She's into dinosaurs now, but honestly, she's already got all the toys and books she can think of. I see. I paused. Do you have anything special planned for this day? Just a normal children's party. Nothing special, Vivian answered quickly. Look, Mom, I really have to go. A client's waiting. Sure, I won't keep you. Say hi to Marlo and Noel. I will. Bye, bye. And she hung up without waiting for me to answer. I put the phone down and looked out the window. Nothing much then. Only Beatrice was talking about renting an entire entertainment center. Obviously, Vivian didn't want me to know the extent of the festivities, and she probably wasn't going to invite me. That was nothing new or surprising. I'd long ago resigned myself to my role in their family, a ghost who was tolerated out of politeness but would rather not be seen at all. Vivian never said it outright, but her every action screamed, "We don't need you." I remembered Marlo's first birthday and how Elizabeth, Noel's mother, had literally pushed me away from my granddaughter. Let me hold her. Your arms must be tired, she said then, taking Marlo practically by force. Vivian didn't object, didn't even notice this maneuver, or pretended not to notice. Elizabeth was the opposite of me, loud, expansive, always prying. She'd moved to Decatur shortly after Marlo was born, bought a house a 10-minute walk from Vivian and Noel. I want to be closer to my granddaughter, she announced at a family dinner to which I'd been invited at the last minute. I also suggested to Vivian that she move closer to me or vice versa, but was flatly refused. We are comfortable where we live now. Elizabeth became indispensable in their lives. She sat with Marlo when the nanny took a day off, helped with the cleaning, cooked dinners for the whole family. Such a wonderful grandmother, general acquaintances marveled. No one seemed to think about the fact that Marlo had another grandmother who was not allowed to play the role. Vivian and Noel often visited Elizabeth unannounced, spent weekends at her house, celebrated all holidays at her house. They came to me only on formal invitations, stayed as long as propriety required, and always had a good reason to leave early. I tried to understand the reason for this attitude. Had Vivian still not forgiven me for the strictness of her childhood? Or was it something else? Was it that I reminded her of something unpleasant? Or maybe I just didn't fit the image of the perfect family she'd created. Noel wasn't exactly conducive to bonding either. Always polite, always correct, he never took the initiative to talk to me. He agreed with every word Vivian said, supported every decision she made, including those that involved me in Marlo's life. The perfect son-in-law in public, he was still a stranger to me, even after all these years. One day I overheard him on the phone, unaware I was in the next room. Yes, my mother-in-law is coming over for dinner again. I know it's going to ruin the evening, but Vivian thinks we should maintain the appearance of a family relationship. Visibility was how they perceived our socializing. I sighed and went into the kitchen to make dinner. There was no point in diving into these thoughts over and over again. The fact remained that I was a stranger in my own daughter's family, an invisible grandmother whose existence was recognized only in words. But it wasn't my own situation that bothered me most, but its effect on Marlo. What did she think of me? What had her parents told her? Did she know she had a grandmother who loved her without even being able to show it? On her last visit, Marlo had been distant, as if she'd been led to believe that I wasn't worth getting close to. At 4 years old, children are usually open and curious, but she was looking at me with a wariness that couldn't have arisen on its own. Someone must have planted that distrust in her. I remembered an episode that had happened at that same Christmas dinner. Marlo had accidentally broken a glass angel figurine, an inexpensive piece of jewelry that was on the coffee table. Vivian immediately exploded. "See what you've done? That was Grandma's prized possession." The girl stared at the shards in horror, ready to cry. I hurried to calm her down. "Don't worry, dear. It's just a trinket." But it was too late. Vivian had already taken her into the other room to calm down. And when they returned, Marlo avoided looking in my direction, as if I were a stern judge ready to sentence her for the slightest offense. What else had Vivian told her about me? What image of grandmother did she conjure up in her mind? A wicked old woman from a fairy tale? A strict principal? Or worse, an empty place not even worth mentioning? I set the table, sat down to eat lunch alone, as I'd done almost every day for the past 15 years, since Harold died. Loneliness didn't scare me. I'd gotten used to it, learned to find its benefits. But sometimes, especially at times like this, it felt like a heavy blanket that was hard to throw off. After lunch, I decided to take a walk. The day was clear and warm, perfect for a leisurely stroll through a park not far from home. I loved this park. The old trees, the manicured flower beds, the pond with the ducks. A place where you could sit for hours, watching the life around you without feeling lonely. I took my usual bench by the water and watched the children playing in the playground nearby. A girl about Marlo's age was swinging on a swing, and a woman, obviously her grandmother, was standing nearby, pushing the swing and laughing with the child. A common scene that should have been in my life as well, but which I was deprived of. I imagined how it might have been. Marlo comes to visit me every weekend. We bake cookies, read books, play board games. I tell her stories about what Decatur was like in the past, what her grandfather was like, what her mom was like as a child. We create memories that she will keep for a lifetime. Instead, I had rare, tense meetings under Vivian's watchful eye and photos emailed every few months. This was not how I envisioned the role of grandmother. My gaze fell on a playground where a boy about 5 years old had fallen and was crying. His mother immediately ran over, picked him up, shook him off, and kissed his bruised knee. A common episode in the life of any family. I remembered Vivian falling off her bike at the same age. I didn't rush to her, but stood by, watching her get up on her own. "You'll be fine," I said then. "It's only a scratch." She didn't cry, just pressed her lips together and got back on her bike. Strong, stubborn, just like me. Perhaps too much like me for our own good. I always thought I was raising her right, teaching her independence, resilience, coping skills. But looking at this mother and her son, I wondered, maybe I had been too strict. Maybe Vivian didn't need lessons in resilience, but more hugs, kisses, words of encouragement. And now she was raising Marlo differently, with an overabundance of everything she hadn't gotten herself. I saw it in their interactions, constant touching, kissing, praise for the smallest of accomplishments. There was nothing wrong with that, but sometimes it felt like Vivian was going the other way, making her daughter the center of the universe. I got home as the sun was already slipping toward dusk. My phone's new message indicator was flashing. I listened to the voicemail Beatrice was calling, inviting me to bridge tomorrow. I dialed her number. "How about tea before the game?" She suggested it. "I want to show you the pictures from my trip to Florida." "That sounds wonderful," I agreed. "I'll be at your place at 2. Beatrice had been my outlet for the last few years. The only person I could be completely honest with without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. She too was a widow, also had a complicated relationship with her children. We understood each other without too many words. In the evening, I went through the family albums again. Vivian in kindergarten, at school, at graduation. Our rare photos together, tense, staged, without sincere smiles. Had we always been such strangers to each other? Was there a moment when everything went wrong? Or was it inevitable from the start? Two stubborn, strong characters doomed to clash. I closed the album and walked to the window. The nighttime Decatur shone with lights like a scattering of stars on black velvet. The city I'd helped build, where I'd lived my whole life, but where I felt more and more alone every year. The phone rang, snapping me out of my reverie. Vivian's number. "At this late hour? Is something wrong?" "Hello?" I couldn't help but sound alarmed. "Hi, Mom." Vivian's voice sounded normal, without a trace of agitation. "I'm sorry to call you so late. I was wondering if you could lend us your cake set, the one with the gold border, for Marlo's birthday. I could barely contain my surprise. A cake set she'd never noticed before was suddenly needed for a party I obviously hadn't been invited to. Of course, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. When do you want to pick it up? Tomorrow, maybe? I'll stop by after work if you'll be home. I'll be at Beatrice's bridge until 6, but I can leave it on the veranda if you like. No, I'd better come back another day. I don't want to take any chances with such a fragile set. Whatever you say, I agreed. By the way, since you're calling about the birthday party, maybe I should come early that day. I can help with the arrangements. There was a pause. Oh, Mom, Vivian began with that peculiar tone she used when she was about to say something unpleasant but was trying to soften the blow. About the party, we decided to make it just for the kids and their parents. Marlo will be too busy with her peers, you'll be bored. Same argument as before. Like I wasn't a grandmother, but a random acquaintance with nothing to do at a children's party. I understand, I said, feeling the bitterness rising inside. Well, tell Marlo congratulations. After a sleepless night, I made a decision. No more hints and innuendo. I deserved a straight answer about Marlo's birthday, not evasive phrases about just for kids and their parents. Blood wasn't water, and I had every right to know why I was being excluded from an important event in my granddaughter's life. The morning was overcast, matching my mood. I canceled bridge with Beatrice, citing a migraine. I didn't want to answer the inevitable questions about Marlo's birthday preparations, what I planned to give her, what dress I'd wear. Lying was getting harder as I got older. At 9:30, when Vivian was usually already in the office, I dialed her office number. She always preferred business conversations short, to the point, unemotional. Well, that's exactly the kind of conversation she'd get today. Premium Real Estate Agency, Vivian Treadwell speaking. Her voice sounded professional and detached. Good morning, Vivian. It's Mom. Pause. I could practically see her straightening up in her leather chair, preparing for defense. Mom, is something wrong? The eternal question, as if I could only call because of a terminal illness or a house fire. No, nothing urgent, but we need to talk. I'm a little busy right now, she said, a touch of irritation in her voice. Why don't I call you back later? It won't take long, I insisted. I want to talk about Marlo's birthday. Another pause, a longer one. What exactly are you interested in? She asked cautiously. Why I'm not invited. Straightforward. A question that had long demanded an answer. Mom, we've already discussed this. It's a children's party. It's going to be loud. There's going to be a lot of activity. You won't be comfortable. I didn't ask if I'd be comfortable. I'm asking why Grandma isn't invited to her own granddaughter's birthday party. Look, her tone became irritated. We've rented the Magic Land Amusement Center. There will be slides, trampolines, animators. 25 kids with their parents. That's no place for a woman your age. My age? I could feel the anger rising in me. What do you mean? I'm in great shape. I can stand on my feet all day if I have to. It's not just that, Vivian sighed. It's just, Noel's family will be there. His colleagues with their children, my colleagues. You won't have anyone to socialize with. What about you? Or Noel? Or maybe Marlo? Do I come to family events to socialize with strangers? In the background, I heard a voice asking something to Vivian. She covered the phone with her hand, answered her coworker, then returned to the conversation. Look, I really don't feel comfortable talking right now. Let's discuss it later. No, Vivian, my voice became firmer. We'll talk about it now. I want to know the truth. Why am I not invited to Marlo's birthday party when Noel's mother will be the guest of honor? Where are you from? She stammered. Oh, of course, Beatrice and her gossip. Don't change the subject. I'm waiting for an answer. There was a heavy pause. When Vivian spoke again, her voice sounded cold and determined. Okay, you want the truth? Here it is. I don't want you at my daughter's birthday party. I don't want you sitting there with your perpetually disgruntled face, criticizing my every decision. I don't want to hear your comments about how much money we spent on the party. What wrong gifts we're giving Marlo, how we're raising her wrong. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Yes, we had our disagreements, but I had never allowed myself to criticize her parenting decisions publicly. I've never done anything like that, I countered. You haven't? Vivian grinned. What about Christmas when you said in front of everyone that we'd spoiled Marlo beyond belief? Or Thanksgiving when you said that modern parents let their kids do too much? Or, I was talking in general, not about you specifically, I interrupted her, though I knew that wasn't true. Of course, I was referring to them. Everyone here knew who you were talking about, Vivian said. It's always been that way, Mother. You never criticize directly. It's always these veiled comments that make it worse. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. The conversation was going in the wrong direction. Okay, maybe I'd been too harsh in some of my remarks, but that's no reason to remove me from Marlo's life. She's my granddaughter, my only granddaughter. That's why I don't want you to influence her, Vivian said with unexpected candor. I don't want her to grow up with your ideas about life, your attitude toward people, your principles. Her words sounded like an accusation, as if my principles were something shameful, contagious, something to protect the child from. What's wrong with my principles? I asked, feeling my voice tremble. Didn't I raise you to be honest, hardworking, independent? Didn't I give you an education? Didn't give you a roof over your head? That's exactly what I'm talking about, Vivian exclaimed. Always, always you remind me of what you have done for me, as if I am eternally indebted to you. Money, education, a roof over your head, it's not a favor, Mother, it's a parent's duty. I never thought of it as a favor, I countered, though I knew in my heart that sometimes I did use those arguments in our arguments. I just wanted to say that I'd always tried to give you everything you needed. Except love and support, Vivian said quietly, and the words hurt the most. You gave me things, Mom, but you never gave me what I really needed. I felt a lump come up in my throat. Had she really thought that? In all those years, had she never seen, never felt how much I loved her? Yes, I hadn't been emotionally open, hadn't showered her with kisses and hugs like Elizabeth had done with Marlo. But is love only measured in those ways? It's not fair, Vivian, I said, trying to stay calm. I loved you the way I knew how. Not everyone can express their feelings in the same way. Oh, I know, she grinned bitterly. You loved me in your own way. But what a child needs is not that kind of abstract love, but real love that can be felt, which manifests itself not in the payment of tuition bills, but in support, in acceptance, in indulging your every whim. I couldn't take it anymore. A lack of boundaries and discipline? Is that what you're teaching Marlo? Vivian exhaled sharply. See, you can't even keep from criticizing me now. This is why I don't want you anywhere near my daughter. That's why I've decided to cut you out of her life. Those words hung between us like a heavy curtain. Cut you out. Not temporarily suspended, not restricted, but cut you out of the child's life completely. You can't do that, I finally said. I'm her grandmother. I have rights. What rights, Mom? Vivian sounded annoyed. Legally, grandmothers don't have any rights to grandchildren unless the parents have terminated their parental rights. Morally, well, you broke that bond with your attitude. My attitude? I felt myself boiling over. What about your attitude? You've been pushing me away from Marlo since the beginning. Never gave us a chance to build a relationship. It was always Elizabeth, always your mother-in-law, and all I got was crumbs from your table. Don't be so dramatic, Vivian cut her off. Elizabeth just knows how to deal with children. She doesn't criticize, she doesn't lecture, she doesn't compare Marlo to me at her age. She just loves her and accepts her for who she is. And I don't love and accept her? You love the idea of a granddaughter, Vivian said after a pause. The idea of a continuation of the family, an heiress, someone to whom you can pass on your values, but you don't know Marlo as a person. And frankly, I'm not sure you've ever seen a personality, even in me. Her words hit the target, finding the most painful points. Was there a grain of truth in them that I couldn't deny? Perhaps. But it didn't justify her decision. I've always respected you as a person, Vivian, I said quietly. Yes, we'd had our disagreements. Yes, I've been strict and demanding, but I never questioned your right to make your own decisions, even when I disagreed with them. Did you? There was sarcasm in her voice. What about that party when I was 16? Did you respect my decision back then? You were a kid going to a party with alcohol and no adult supervision. Of course I couldn't approve of that. And college? You were against my choice of major, against me moving to another city. You were even against Noel when I brought him to meet you. I never said I was against Noel, I countered, though again I knew that wasn't entirely true. I did doubt him as a husband for my daughter, though I didn't say so explicitly. Not in words, Vivian agreed, but your face, your looks. You never could hide your disapproval, Mother. She was right, and it made me even angrier. I was never a good actress, never good at pretending. Maybe that was the problem. My inability to hide my true thoughts and feelings? Okay, Vivian, I decided to change tactics. Suppose you're right. Suppose I was too critical, too strict, not emotional enough, but that's no reason to deprive Marlo of a grandmother. Children need a connection to their roots, to their family. She has a family, Vivian cut her off. Noel and I, Noel's parents, are friends who love her and accept her for who she is. She doesn't need someone to judge her for every mistake, to compare her to other kids, to make her feel like she's not good enough. I would never. You already do, Vivian interrupted me. Every time you see her. Why does she talk so loud? At her age, you could already read. She's too active for a girl. You think I don't notice those comments? You think Marlo doesn't hear them? I bit my lip. Perhaps I had indeed said something like that without giving my words much thought, not realizing how they might be perceived by a child. I didn't mean to offend anyone, I said quietly. If my words sounded critical, I apologize. I could be more careful about what I say. It's not about the words, Mom, Vivian sighed. It's your attitude, the way you look at the world, at people, at relationships. You're always looking for faults, always noticing what's done wrong, never focusing on the good. I grew up constantly feeling like I wasn't good enough for your standards. I don't want Marlo to experience the same thing. Her words were like a punch in the face. Is that really who I am? Always dissatisfied, always criticizing? The image she was painting was painfully familiar, exactly how my own mother felt about me. Was I, despite my best efforts to be different, repeating her mistakes? Vivian, I hesitated, not knowing what to say. How could I explain that my demanding behavior was an act of caring, not a lack of love? That I wanted what was best for her? That I wanted to protect her from the mistakes I'd made? I never meant to hurt you. Everything I did was out of love. Perhaps. Her voice softened a little. But sometimes, love expressed in the wrong way does more harm than good. We fell silent, and in the silence I heard only the pounding of my heart and the distant voices in Vivian's office. What could I say? How could I fix decades of misunderstandings, resentments, unspoken feelings? Listen, Vivian finally said, I don't want to break off the relationship completely. You're still my mother and she stammered, as if hesitant to say the word love. I respect you, but right now, my priority is Marlo's well-being. And if that requires me to limit your contact, I'll do it. Limiting it is one thing, I replied. Cutting it off completely is another. You can't stop me from seeing my granddaughter. I can, she said firmly. And I will if I have to. Right now it's just a birthday party. I'm not inviting you because I don't want it to be marred by our complicated relationship. Marlo deserves a carefree celebration. What's going to happen next? I asked. Next Christmas? Thanksgiving? When will I ever see her again? I don't know, Vivian answered honestly. It depends on a lot of factors. Your behavior, My behavior? I felt myself boiling again. I'm not a child, Vivian, who can be punished by being deprived of dessert. I am your mother and grandmother Marlo. I have rights and responsibilities to this family. The only thing you have is the right to respect my decisions as a mother. Vivian cut Vivian off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting in 5 minutes. I have to go. Vivian, don't you hang up on me. We're not done with this conversation. It's over for me. Her voice was cold and detached again. You're not invited to Marlo's birthday party. Period. Accept that as a fact and move on. How can you be so cruel? My voice shook. After everything I've done for you. That's exactly what I was talking about. Vivian sighed tiredly. It always comes back to what you've done for me. But you know what you never did, Mom? You never asked me what I needed, what I want, how I feel. It was always more important to you that everything was right according to your standards than that I was happy. That's not true, I countered. But even for me, the words sounded unconvincing. It's absolutely true, and you know it, Vivian said. And that's why I don't want you at my daughter's birthday party. I don't want you to ruin her birthday with your comments, your looks, your expectations. She deserves better. And I don't even deserve to be a part of her life? After everything? Stop it. Her voice became harsh. Just stop. I have to go. Goodbye, Mom. And she hung up, leaving me to listen to the short beeps. I slowly put the phone down. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding like crazy. It had been a long time since Vivian and I had had such a frank, such a painful conversation. Usually we limited ourselves to formal phrases, avoiding sharp edges, pretending everything was fine. Today the masks had been ripped off, and what was revealed beneath them frightened me. Did she really see me that way? As a cold, critical, emotionally unavailable mother, thinking only of rules and standards? Had she not seen my love, my care, my desire to give her the best? I walked to the window, looking out at my manicured garden. Every bush, every flower had been planted and nurtured with care and attention to detail. Everything in its place, everything according to plan. Maybe that's how I treated the people in my life too, expecting them to grow and develop according to my plan, to conform to my expectations. The phone in my hand rang again. Vivian decided to apologize? I glanced at the screen. Beatrice. Not now. I dismissed the call, unable to speak to anyone after this conversation. My thoughts swirled in my head like fall leaves in the wind. Cut Marlo out of my life. Deprive the only granddaughter of her grandmother. Sever family ties that should be sacred. How could Vivian do this? And what could I have done to prevent such an outcome? I walked slowly into my office, sitting down at my desk. On the desk was a folder of papers, my will, my investment portfolio, plans for an educational foundation for Marlo. $1 million, a sum that could change my granddaughter's life, open the doors of the best universities in the world to her. Money I'd been saving for years, saving for myself, investing with care and foresight. Vivian didn't know about these plans. I hadn't told her, fearing she would take it as an attempt to buy her favor or interfere with Marlo's upbringing. Now I wondered, should I have mentioned it in our conversation? Would it have changed anything? Or would it have only confirmed her opinion of me as someone who thought money could solve any problem? No, I did the right thing by keeping quiet about the fund. It wasn't a decision made to manipulate Vivian or to get her to let me see my granddaughter. It was a decision made out of love for Marlo, out of a desire to secure her future regardless of her relationship with her mother. And that decision still stood, despite today's conversation. In fact, now I was even more convinced of its correctness. If Vivian was really going to cut me out of Marlo's life, if I couldn't be there for my granddaughter, to support her, to guide her, then at least I could ensure her financial independence in the future. To give her the choices that Vivian felt I had deprived her of herself. I opened the folder, went through the documents. I'll call my attorney, Theodore Bryant, tomorrow. We'll start the process of setting up an education fund for Marlo. The money will be available to her when she reaches 18, the age when she can make her own decisions, independent of her parents' influence. Will Vivian be angry when she finds out about this? Absolutely. Will she perceive it as another attempt at control? Probably. But I didn't care anymore. I was doing what I thought was right, what my love for my granddaughter dictated. I closed the folder and took a deep breath. The pain of Vivian's words still throbbed somewhere inside, but the determination was empowering. Maybe I really was the kind of mother she had described me as. Perhaps I had made many mistakes in my upbringing. But one thing I knew for sure was that I had never stopped loving my daughter, and I would never stop loving my granddaughter, even if I wasn't allowed to be a part of her life. I stood up and walked over to the window. The day was in full swing. The sun was shining brightly. Life went on despite the broken hearts and shattered hopes. Tomorrow I would begin to take action. And today I will allow myself to grieve for what I've lost and what I may never have. Theodore Bryant's office was in an old brick building in downtown Decatur. The attorney occupied the second floor entirely, which spoke volumes about his success and reputation. I'd worked with him for over 20 years, ever since he'd helped draft Harold's will. Over the years, we'd developed an almost friendly relationship, though we'd never crossed professional boundaries. I took the wide stairs, ignoring the elevator. At my age, it's important to keep physically active, even in the little things. The receptionist, a young woman with neatly bunched hair, greeted me with a smile of recognition. "Good morning, Mrs. Flannery. Mr. Bryant is expecting you." She ushered me into the study, where Theodore had already risen from his desk to greet me. He was a tall, trim man in his 60s, with a streak in his dark hair and an attentive gaze from beneath his thin-rimmed glasses. "Agatha." He shook my hand. "It's good to see you in good health." "Likewise, Theodore." I allowed myself a slight smile. "Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule." "Always for you." He gestured for me to sit down in the comfortable leather chair across from his desk. "So, you mentioned on the phone that you wanted to discuss setting up an educational foundation for your granddaughter. That's a big decision." "I never make frivolous decisions, Theodore," I said, pulling a folder of documents out of my purse. "Especially when it comes to this kind of money." He nodded, taking the folder from my hands. The first few minutes passed in silence as he went through the contents: account statements, investment portfolio reports, real estate appraisals. I waited patiently, watching his eyebrows raise occasionally when he got to a particularly impressive number. "I must admit, Agatha," he finally said, looking up, "your finances are in excellent order, as always. $1 million for an educational foundation is an impressive sum. Are you sure you want to allocate that much of your assets?" "Absolutely sure," I nodded. "The rest is more than enough to live comfortably at my age. And Marlo, she deserves the best education she can get." I didn't mention my recent conversation with Vivian. Theodore was my lawyer, not my therapist. He didn't need to know about the family dramas behind this decision. "Very well." He folded his hands on the table. "Let's discuss the details. Do you want the funds to be available to Marlo when he reaches a certain age, or when he enrolls in higher education?" 18, I answered without hesitation. She'd have to decide on a university by then. And at that age, she would be old enough to make her own decisions. "I see." Theodore made a note in his notebook. "And what restrictions do you want to place on the use of the funds? Only tuition or a wider range of educational expenses?" "I want the fund to cover everything related to education," I thought for a moment. "Tuition, textbooks, room and board, educational travel, but no more than that. It shouldn't be pocket money for entertainment." "Reasonable," Theodore nodded. "What about managing the fund until Marlo is 18? Who do you see as the trustee?" "I've thought about that question beforehand, too." "You, Theodore, if you agree. I trust your competence and your integrity. You know how I feel about money, and you share my views on its wise use." He looked a little surprised. "Not your daughter or son-in-law?" "No," I shook my head. "I prefer it to be managed by an independent person with the appropriate qualifications." Theodore nodded understandingly, not asking any further questions. Over the years, he had learned to respect my restraint in personal matters. "In that case," he continued, "we need to discuss an investment strategy for the fund. $1 million, properly invested, could grow significantly in 13 years before Marlo's adulthood." We spent the next hour discussing technical details, asset allocation, types of investments, tax considerations. I insisted on a conservative strategy, preferring steady growth to risky speculation. Harold sometimes joked about my financial prudence, but it was my prudence that allowed us to accumulate a considerable fortune by the time of his death. "There is one more important aspect we need to discuss," Theodore said when we had finished with the investment strategy. "How do you plan to inform your daughter and son-in-law about this fund?" I had been expecting this question and had already prepared an answer. "We don't." I held his surprised look. "At least not now. They'll only know about the foundation after I'm dead, when it can't be changed." "Agatha." Theodore took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "It's not for me to tell you what to do with your money. But withholding information about such a significant asset could lead to complications in the family relationship. Our relationship is already complicated enough, I said dryly, and I prefer that my financial decisions not be discussed or manipulated. He nodded, realizing that further questioning was futile. Very well. In that case, I will have the necessary documents ready by tomorrow. You will need to return to sign them. Thank you, Theodore. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I have one more request. I would like you to prepare an envelope that will be given to Marlo along with the foundation documents when she reaches 18. I'll write her a letter. Of course, he rose as well. It's a wise decision to explain your motives to her in person. We said goodbye, and I left the office with a sense of accomplishment. The first step had been taken. Now, no matter what the relationship between Vivian and me turned out to be, Marlo's future was somewhat secure. As I left the building, I decided not to go home right away. The day was clear, warm, and I headed to a small park nearby. I found a vacant bench in the shade of an old oak tree and sat down, watching the people passing by. Young mothers with strollers, office workers hurrying to lunch, elderly couples strolling leisurely, holding hands. My thoughts returned to my conversation with Theodore. He was right to question my decision not to inform Vivian about the foundation. Normally, I avoided secrets. They made life difficult and rarely led to anything good. But in this case, the alternative seemed worse. If I told Vivian about the foundation now, she'd probably take it as an attempt to buy a place in Marlo's life, or as a criticism of her ability to provide her daughter with a decent education. Or worse, as manipulation on my part. In our last conversation, she'd made it clear that she saw my financial decisions that way, as a tool of control. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps deep down I did want to retain some control over the situation, not wanting to completely let go of my connection to my only granddaughter. But was that so wrong? Wasn't it natural for a grandmother to want to leave something meaningful to her heiress? I pulled a small notepad and pen out of my purse. Marlo's letter. What could I say to a girl I barely knew? How could I explain my feelings, my hopes, my regrets to a man who might not even remember me by the time he read my words? I began to write slowly, choosing each word carefully. Dear Marlo, as you read these lines, you are 18 years old and on the threshold of adulthood. I don't know if you remember me, your grandmother Agatha. Perhaps you have only vague memories, or perhaps circumstances have worked out in such a way that we have continued to see each other all these years. Whatever the case, I want you to know that I have always loved you, even if I haven't had the opportunity to show it in the way I would have liked. The money you receive with this letter is for your education. Not to buy a car or expensive clothes, not to travel or have fun, but to invest in your mind, in your future. This is the most valuable thing I can give you. You may have heard stories about me, strict, demanding, stingy with emotions. Those stories may even be true. I was never the perfect mother to your mom, and I probably wouldn't be the perfect grandmother to you. But I have always believed in the power of knowledge, the importance of education, and the need to be financially independent, especially for a woman. It took me decades of hard work to get to the position that allowed me to create this foundation for you. I started from scratch, with no support, no privileges. Everything I've accomplished has been the result of perseverance, discipline, and the ability to manage money well. I hope you use this chance wisely. Choose an education that will give you not only a profession, but also satisfaction. Study not for the sake of a diploma, but for the sake of knowledge. And remember that real independence begins with confidence in your own strength and abilities. I don't know what kind of relationship has developed between me and your mom by the time you are reading this letter. Hopefully, our differences have smoothed out over time. But even if they haven't, please don't judge her or me too harshly. Sometimes the closest people hurt each other not out of malice, but out of misunderstanding or inability to express their feelings differently. Your grandmother, Agatha Flannery. I reread what I had written. The words seemed clumsy, unable to convey what I wanted to say. But it was a start. I would finish the letter at home, in peace. The sun was already setting when I got home. In the mailbox, I found a stack of bills and sales brochures. A brightly colored envelope with a clown and balloons stood out. An invitation card to Marlo's birthday party. I froze with the envelope in my hand, unable to believe my eyes. After talking to Vivian yesterday, I was sure I wouldn't get an invitation. What was this? An olive branch? An attempt at reconciliation? Or just a formality to save face in front of the other guests? Opening the envelope, I saw a colorful card that read, Marlo turns 5. We invite you to celebrate this day at the Magic Land Entertainment Center. At the bottom in small print were the date, time, and address. No personal address, no handwritten signature. A standard invitation that had probably been sent out to all the guests. But why had Vivian decided to send it to me after our conversation? It didn't make sense. I checked the postmark on the envelope. It was dated the day before yesterday. So the invitation had been sent before our conflict. Vivian must have sent them out to everyone beforehand, including me, and then in the heat of the argument, claimed I wasn't invited. What am I supposed to do now? Go to the party and risk causing a scandal? Or ignore the invitation, resigning myself to Vivian's decision to cut me out of Marlo's life? I set the card aside. There was plenty of time to think about it. The birthday was next Saturday. It was more important now to finalize the foundation for Marlo. In my office, I sat down at my desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. The draft of the letter from the park needed revision. Some phrases sounded too formal, others too emotional. I needed to find the right balance. As I worked on the letter, I kept thinking about the conversation with Vivian, her words, her accusations, her decision to cut me out of her daughter's life. Was there any truth to it? Was I really as cold, critical a mother as she described me as? Perhaps. I was never warm or emotionally open. I didn't know how to express feelings with words or touch. My parents were not inclined to be affectionate either, and I adopted their reserved style of communication. For me, love was expressed in deeds, in providing stability, in creating opportunities, in protecting me from life's difficulties. But for Vivian, it wasn't enough. She needed emotional connection, words of encouragement, hugs, and approval. What I saw as a show of autonomy, letting her solve problems without my intervention, she saw as indifference. What to me was caring, strict rules, high expectations, to her was pressure and criticism. We spoke different love languages and never learned to translate. Now that same chasm separated Marlo and me. Only this time, I didn't even have the opportunity to try to bridge it. Vivian had put a barrier between us, and I saw no way around it. All that remained were these secret threads, the educational foundation, the letter Marlo would read 13 years later. Invisible ties that might one day connect us, when time had smoothed out the sharp edges of the conflict with her mother. I returned to the letter, rewriting it over and over until I was satisfied with every word. I enclosed several photographs. Harold and I as young adults, Vivian as a child, Marlo in my arms during one of her rare visits. A little time capsule that would keep the memory of us alive, even if everything else was forgotten. The next morning, I returned to Theodore's office with the final version of the letter. He had already prepared all the documents for the establishment of the Educational Foundation. We spent another hour discussing the final details, after which I signed a dozen pages of legal text. Everything is ready, Agatha, Theodore said, gathering the documents. The foundation will be officially registered within a week. I'll send you quarterly reports on the status of the investments. Thank you, Theodore. I handed him the envelope with the letter. Please make sure that this will be given to Marlo along with the fund documents when the time comes. He accepted the envelope with a serious expression on his face. You can rest assured that I will personally see to it. We shook hands, and I left his office with a sense of accomplishment. The deed was done. Now, no matter what happened between Vivian and me, Marlo's future was somewhat secure. On the drive home, I reflected on my life, on the decisions that had brought me to this point. About Harold, who had been my rock in difficult times. About the job that made me feel important and independent. About Vivian, who, despite all our conflicts, was flesh on my flesh, an extension of my life in this world. And of Marlo, a little girl with bright blue eyes and a stubborn chin, so much like her mother at the same age. A girl who may never know how much her grandmother loved her, how much I was willing to give her, not just money, but wisdom, experience, support. All the things Vivian says I couldn't give her myself. But life rarely gives us a second chance to correct past mistakes. Sometimes we can only move forward, doing the best we can with what we have now. And right now, I had that foundation a secret thread linking me to Marlowe's future, even if I wouldn't be a part of her present. I returned home and sat in a chair by the window, looking out at the manicured garden. The roses I'd planted last year were already starting to bloom. Harold always said that a garden is a metaphor for life. You plant the seeds, tend the plants, but you can never fully control how they will grow. Too many factors affect the outcome: weather, soil, pests. It's the same with children and grandchildren. We do our best to create a favorable environment for them, but ultimately they grow according to their own laws, shaped by circumstances we can't foresee or change. Perhaps Vivian was right in saying that I was trying too hard to control her life. Perhaps I should have trusted more in the natural process of growth, worried less about weeds and pests, rejoiced more in each new leaf and bud. But now it was too late for such thinking. What's done is done. I could only hope that my actions today, setting up the foundation for Marlowe, the letter she would read in the future, would be seen as an act of love rather than control. As a desire to help, not manipulate. After all, isn't that what being a grandmother is all about? To give without expectation, to love without conditions, to support without interference, to be a quiet presence in the background, ready to help when asked, but not imposing my help. I couldn't change the past or control the future, but I could create this secret thread, this bridge across time and distance that might one day connect me to Marlowe, even if I was no longer around. And maybe someday when Marlowe reads my letter and learns about the foundation, she will realize that behind the stern facade, behind all the mistakes and misunderstandings, was simply a woman who loved her family as much as she knew how. Imperfectly, awkwardly, sometimes wrongly, but with all her heart. That was my hope, my comfort in these days of alienation and loneliness. A secret thread linking past to future, grandmother to granddaughter, across all barriers and distances. Dr. Morgan's office was just as I remembered it. Bright walls, framed diplomas, pictures of the family on the desk. Andrew Morgan had been my doctor for 15 years, since Dr. Peyton retired. He was about 20 years younger than me, but there was gray in his dark hair and wrinkles in the corners of his eyes, the marks of years of strain and responsibility for people's lives. "Have a seat, Agatha," he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "How are you feeling today?" "The same as always," I replied, sinking into the chair. "A little tired, a little dizzy sometimes. Nothing unusual for my age." He nodded, opening my chart on the computer. I noticed his eyes lingering on the results of the latest tests. "We've gotten the results of all the tests," he began after a pause. "Not good news, I'm afraid." I straightened in my chair, preparing to hear the diagnosis. In my long life, I've learned to face bad news with dignity. "You've been diagnosed with a pancreatic tumor," he said bluntly, knowing my dislike of euphemisms. "Unfortunately, it's already in an advanced stage. There are metastases to the liver." I nodded silently, accepting the information. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew something was wrong with me. For the past few months, my body had been sending signals, not obvious, but noticeable enough for someone used to listening to herself. "What's the prognosis?" I asked when the silence lengthened. Dr. Morgan folded his hands on the table, looking me straight in the eye. "Given your age and stage of disease, 6 to 8 months. Perhaps a year with aggressive treatment. Another nod, 6 months, or a year. Not much, but not too little if you use that time wisely." "What treatment options do you have?" "We could consider chemotherapy," he began. "It could slow the progression of the disease, give you more time, but the side effects would be serious, especially at your age. There's still the possibility of palliative surgery to relieve symptoms when they become more severe." "And if you do nothing?" I asked. "Just let nature take its course?" He sighed, and in that sigh I heard understanding. "Then the symptoms would increase gradually. At first, fatigue, loss of appetite, pain that could be controlled with medication. Toward the end, more serious pain management will be required. But before that, you'll have a period of relatively normal life." I reflected, looking out the window at the clinic parking lot. People were coming and going, busy with their own concerns, unaware that at this very moment my life was divided into a before and after. "I need time to think about treatment options," I finally said. "But I appreciate your candor, Dr. Morgan." Of course, he nodded. This is a big decision, and it needs to be considered. We can meet in a few days to discuss your choice. In the meantime, I'll prescribe you some painkillers in case the pain gets worse. He made a few notes on the computer, then looked at me with slight uncertainty. Agatha, are you planning to inform your daughter's diagnosis? Family support can be very important at times like this. I shook my head without even thinking. No, at least not right now. But, Dr. Morgan, I interrupted him gently but firmly, I appreciate your concern. But family relationships can be complicated. My daughter and we have our own difficulties. I prefer to deal with it on my own. He seemed to disagree, but respected my decision. Very well. But know that you don't have to go through this alone. There are support groups, social services, hospice care at home when the time comes. I'll think about it, I promised as I stood up. Thank you for everything, doctor. Leaving the clinic, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I went to the park where I often walked. I found my favorite bench by the pond and sat down, watching the ducks swimming in the murky water. They didn't know about diagnoses and prognoses, about metastasis and chemotherapy. They just lived their duck day, moment by moment. Pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive cancers, especially at my age. Harold died of a heart attack, quickly, without warning. My death would be different, gradual, predictable, with a clear timetable for fading away. Strangely, I felt no fear or despair, only a calm acceptance of the inevitable. At 78, death doesn't seem like such an unexpected guest. It's more like an old acquaintance whose visit has been postponed long enough. What bothered me more were the practical matters. Who will take care of me when I can no longer do it myself? How would I organize my affairs so as not to leave a mess behind? And most importantly, what would happen to my plan to provide for Marlowe's future? The education fund was already set up, the letter written, but there were still many other assets to be distributed. The house, bank accounts, investments, personal effects. The will needed to be updated to be clear and unambiguous. And there was something else I'd been thinking about for the last few days, since my conversation with Vivian. Should I try to build a relationship with my daughter before she died? Make her aware of the diagnosis? Give us both a chance to reconcile? The temptation was great. In movies, terminal illness is often the catalyst for family reunions, for forgiveness of old hurts, for touching scenes at the hospital bedside. But real life rarely follows the scripts of Hollywood melodramas. If I told Vivian about my illness, how would she react? Would she feel genuine grief? Or will she see it as another attempt at manipulation on my part? Another way to make her feel guilty? Or worse, would she take the news with indifference, confirming my worst fears about how deep the gulf between us was? No, I decided, looking out at the calm surface of the pond. I shouldn't use my illness as emotional leverage. It would be unfair to Vivian and humiliating for me. If reconciliation is ever to happen, it must be sincere, not forced by circumstances. Besides, the knowledge of my impending death would embarrass Vivian. She would feel obliged to show concern that she didn't really feel. Or, conversely, tormented by guilt for not being able to overcome her resentment even in the face of my death. Neither of these scenarios seemed desirable to me. No, better to keep the diagnosis a secret, to live the rest of my time with dignity, to organize my affairs so that no mess would be left behind after I was gone. And when the time came and my condition deteriorated to the point where help was needed, I would turn to professionals, not family. The decision made, the only thing left to do was to act. I got up from the bench and headed for the car. Tomorrow I'll visit Theodore Bryant again to update the will. And tonight, I'll sit down and make a detailed plan for the remaining months. At home, the first thing I did was make tea and sit down at the kitchen table with a notepad and pen. The habit of planning, developed over decades of working with finances, had not left me even now. On the first page, I wrote, "Last things to do." Then I made a list. 1. Update the will. Make sure all assets except the education fund are distributed equitably. The bulk to Marlowe into a trust until adulthood, small amounts to charities I've worked with over the years. 2. Organize storage of personal belongings, photos, letters, diaries, anything that might have sentimental value to Marlowe in the future. It might be worth creating a separate labeled box to make it easier for her to navigate. 3. Decide on a house. Sell it now or leave it as an inheritance. If left, who will look after it? 4. Arrange for end-stage care. Hospice, a nurse, what options does insurance offer? 5. Funeral, simple cremation, no ceremony. Set aside money for the arrangements in advance. The list was practical, unsentimental, the way my whole life had been. I saw no point in changing my approach now that the end was in sight. Finished with my planning, I stepped out into the garden. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, creating almost theatrical lighting for my flowers and shrubs. The roses I planted last fall were already starting to bloom. I wondered if I would see them bloom next spring. I sat down on a bench under an old apple tree that had been here since before Harold and I bought the house. How many times had I sat on this very spot, thinking about life, about work, about family? How many decisions had been made with the rustling of those leaves? Now I was contemplating death. Not with horror or denial, but with the same pragmatic approach I had taken to everything in life. Death was just another item on the to-do list that needed to be organized in the best possible way. But there was more to it than that, which I thought about as I sat in the garden that evening. About life in general, about its meaning, about what remains after us. Not material possessions, they are important but secondary. But how we will be remembered, what trace we leave in the hearts of the people we loved. What mark did I leave on Vivian's heart? Judging from our last conversation, not a positive one. Strict, critical, emotionally cold. That's how she perceived me. Was there any truth to that? Absolutely. I have never been generous with displays of tenderness. I have never been able to talk about my feelings openly. But there was another side to me, one that Vivian didn't seem to notice or appreciate. My concern for her future, my desire to protect her from mistakes, my willingness to support her financially in times of need. For me, it was love too, just expressed differently. We spoke different love languages and never learned how to translate. And now it was too late. Some relationships just can't be fixed, especially when time is so short. What about Marlo? What mark would I leave on her life? She'd hardly remember me at 5. Memories were still fragile. And if Vivian did decide to cut me out of her life, she wouldn't talk about me. Perhaps for Marlo I will remain only a vague shadow, a grandmother she saw a few times in her early childhood. But there will be another legacy, an educational fund, a letter she will read at 18. Perhaps through these material expressions of care, she would be able to feel what I couldn't put into words. Love, unconditional and deep, demanding nothing in return. I closed my eyes, envisioning Marlo 13 years from now. A beautiful young woman, intelligent, educated, on the cusp of adulthood. She receives my letter, learns about the foundation I've set up for her. What will she think? Will she be grateful? Or will she take it as a strange gesture from a long-dead relative she barely remembers? I wanted to believe that she would understand. That she would see behind the gesture what I'd never been able to show Vivian my love, expressed the only way I knew how. And maybe that understanding will help her break the cycle of misunderstanding and resentment that has haunted our family for generations. Maybe she would grow up different, able to express her feelings openly, not afraid of vulnerability, able to build healthy relationships. The sun was almost over the horizon, coloring the sky a deep shade of purple. I opened my eyes, feeling strangely calm. Life was long, with its ups and downs, its joys and disappointments. I'd made mistakes, made bad decisions, but I'd always tried to do what I thought was right. Now that the end was near, I had no regrets. Only a quiet acceptance of what was, and hope for what would come after me. Hope that the secret threads I'd pulled into the future would one day connect Marlo to our family's history, to my history. I rose from the bench, feeling a slight ache in my back, a reminder of the diagnosis that now determined my future. But I didn't let that pain cloud the moment. There was still time ahead of me, months, maybe a year. Enough to complete my affairs with the same dignity and thoroughness with which I had lived my entire life. Tomorrow I would begin to act on my plan. And tonight I simply enjoyed a quiet evening in the garden, listening to the birds singing as they prepare for bed and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Simple joys that often go unnoticed in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. but become so precious when you know they are limited. The phone rang in the house. I took my time answering it, allowing myself a few more moments alone with the sunset. Whoever it was, the news could wait. More important now was this moment, this feeling of peace and acceptance. When I finally returned to the house, the answering machine was blinking, signaling a new message. I pressed the play button, expecting to hear Beatrice's voice or someone from the card club. But it was Vivian. "Mom, it's me. Listen, about our conversation. I overreacted. I don't want to keep that bad blood between us. Marlo asked about you today. Maybe you'll come to the birthday party after all. Call me back, please." I stood listening to the beeps after the message, not knowing how to feel. Relief? Joy? Suspicion? Was it a genuine desire for reconciliation or just guilt? And did it matter now that my days were numbered? Maybe I should have told her about the diagnosis. Give us both a chance at reconciliation before the end? But no, I decided that would be manipulative, not a true resolution to our problems. I didn't return the call right away. Instead, I sat at my desk and stared at the phone for a long time, thinking about what to say. In the end, I decided to accept the invitation to Marlo's birthday party. Not for Vivian's sake, but for my granddaughter's sake. And for myself to see her again, to remember her smile, her laugh, to keep that image in my heart until the end. But I won't say a word about my illness. It will be my last secret, my last word in the long history of misunderstandings between me and my daughter. I went back to the garden, sat down on the bench, and watched the last rays of the sun disappear over the horizon. There was still a little time ahead. Enough time to finish my business, to see the roses bloom once more, to leave behind not only a material legacy, but perhaps the beginning of healing for generations to come. In the quiet of the garden, under the darkening sky, I envision Marlo years from now, strong, independent, able to love openly, without fear or doubt. A woman who would receive my letter and realize that behind all the mistakes and misunderstandings was simply love. Imperfect, ineptly expressed, but real. That thought brought me peace. Whatever my relationship with Vivian, whatever mistakes I'd made as a mother, Marlo would have a chance at another life, at breaking the cycle. And in that, perhaps, was my true legacy: not money, not a house, not material possessions, but a chance for my granddaughter to start over, without the weight of past hurts and misunderstandings. With that thought, I got up and went into the house, feeling strangely peaceful. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, with all its ups and downs. And even now, facing the end, I felt no fear. Only the quiet hope that the secret threads I'd pulled into the future would one day connect Marlo to our family story, to my story, and maybe help her avoid our mistakes.